You feel good?
And remarkably, the answer might actually be yes.
That's the goal. You might want to live long, but even more important, you want to live well.
We're here to talk about deepening our mind-body connection so that we can lead healthier lives. And there is a tendency for some skeptics to throw out the concept of mind-body health as Californian hippie juju. But one thing that's very interesting, I think, that's changed over the years with this conference is that it used to be that we were trying to prove to the audience that we need to take our mind-body connection seriously if we want good health. But there's been a real shift, which is now we're not talking about proving it, we're talking about how we can work it so that we can be happier and healthier. And so over the next 20 minutes, this panel is going to share with you their insights to talk about exactly that. And I'd like to start with you, Michael. Traditionally, we had a reductionist approach, didn't we, when it came to health? But
Still do.
well, that's what I'm interested to hear about. I mean, to me, it seems like there's a real shift on, and that even mainstream medicine is starting to accept that we need to take our mind and body seriously.
Yep, undoubtedly. I mean, one of the things that happened, obviously, was in the 19th century, we discovered germ theory, and germ theory was spectacularly successful. And then in the 20th century, we discovered DNA, and that was spectacularly successful. So the assumption was that if you went drilling smaller and smaller areas, you would come up with bigger and bigger answers. And it kind of worked up to a certain point. And now we've got to the level where we have frankly managed to, control, curb most infectious diseases. So we're not worried about that. We understand DNA, and we now understand the huge limitations of genetic testing because that turned out to be largely useless. And now we are kind of looking at the microbiota, but we're also looking at the mind-body connection because that's kind of what's left.
Can I build on that?
Were you going to say something, Elissa?
Oh, can I build on that?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Or demolish it, whichever you prefer.
Yeah. So our whole approach still is, we call it medicine, and it's curing each disease once you have it. Most of them can't be cured. And so we're now into molecular signatures of diseases. It's not going to lead to better public health. What we need to do is back way up and say, what are the causes of disease? What promotes good health? How can we slow disease? And that answer is about understanding what slows aging. And guess what? We already know. The healthy ways to live, which include maintaining good mental health, and so much of it is understanding our mind and how we can focus on positive things and creating a happy culture and community. And then the lifestyle factors, we need to get better at it. We need more biohacks that people can do, but it's all achievable. And I don't know if we're going to find a pill to slow aging. We hope we will. It's a big focus of the research enterprise. But even if we did, it's just an adjuvant to how we live, mind and body.
Indeed. I mean, one of the interesting things was, and I was talking about it this morning, big Harvard study followed people for 80 years, and the single conclusion they came to was that the depth and quality of your relationships determined how long you lived and how healthily you lived, and indeed how much money you made. That it was not about anything else. They boiled down to, do you have close friendships? Do you have love in your life, or don't you? And I guess that is a very compelling piece of evidence.
So often we're all looking for that one thing that's going to change our health and our happiness, and we want that one single thing that we've been missing, and whether it's cutting out
My wife, honestly.
Well,
I
I
think
think
that's made the biggest difference in my life. Without doubt, 100%.
Nice one.
I might not say if she was in the audience, because obviously that would be too un-British and too embarrassing. But I feel I can say it because I know that she's however many thousand miles away.
I think...
And the dog.
Yes.
In that order.
I think when people are looking for that one magic pill, though, they want it to be that they need to cut out some micro-ingredient in their diet, or they want to take up some fabulous new therapeutic technique that's just been released. Amit, I'm interested in your perspective here from the psychological point of view. Do you think that we can say that there's one single ingredient?
Probably not.
Have you cut anything out of your life?
FODMAPs.
FODMAPs. Okay.
FODMAPs, short-chain sugars. But
And that was for gut reasons, was it?
Perfect, exactly.
Okay, anyone here on the FODMAP diet? Have you heard about the FODMAP diet?
It's good stuff. I guess from a psychological perspective, and I think it's also consistent with my experience, is that we all are wired to want to be able to predict outcomes so that we have a sense of control and certainty and less ambiguity. And I think to some degree, if there is a common ingredient to making changes in your life that are good for you, I think in some ways it involves changing your kind of metacognitive perspective on that need to be a bit more willing to live with uncertainty, or how do you call it?
Discomfortable?
Discomfortability.
Comfortable in your
Discomfortability.
Nice.
And maybe a little bit more tolerance to live with, not knowing precisely what's going to come about. Yeah, that's what I think.
Do you think that our minds need to be tended to as much as our physical bodies?
I don't think, I would just say that I think, there's really interesting ideas being thrown around these days by people like Larry Barsalou and Lisa Feldman Barrett that talk about embodied minds or embodied cognition. And the idea that I'm not so sure that there is any distinction whatsoever between my thinking body and my physical mind, so to speak. So yeah, I think they're...
Yeah, but that's kind of one of the things, isn't it? Clearly one of the things is that we tend to think of them as separate. Ever since Descartes, we've thought of them as separate, but actually they're just different ways of describing the same thing in a funny way. There's a philosopher called Ryle, and he said it was a conceptual mistake. It's like you say, he came in a suit and a wild state of temperament. That actually they're just different things. You can describe lightning as one thing, but essentially we are mind, we are body, the two are utterly the same thing. And that it's almost impossible to affect one without affecting the other. And that is often kind of where the complexity arises. So for example, with depression, the gut, we now know that the microbiome affects the brain, affects depression, but depression also affects what you eat, which affects the microbiome. So everything interrelates. And what is funny, as you said, is for a long time, we sort of known that, but completely ignored it. And that is kind of one of the bits of wisdom. It's the funny thing about science is when it can start to measure things, it gets interested. So, all sorts of things have been on. The Buddha described time-restricted eating nearly 3,000 years ago. But it's taken 3,000 years before some bloody scientist in California started doing experiments on rats. And suddenly, time-restricted eating is everywhere. It's all over the internet. And as I said, the Buddha was there 3,000 years ago. And we are just rediscovering a lot of the great truths of the great religions. I'm not religious, but I do believe there is fantastic wisdom in those, things.
Yeah.
John, I'm seeing you nodding along there. Do you have something that you'd like to add to this?
No, not really in that sense. I'd agree with exactly what you were saying. But it often takes centuries for some of this wisdom to be recognized. Of course, mindfulness comes straight out of Buddhism. And I'm always, having practiced Buddhism for a while, I'm always amused by the fact that that mindfulness itself gets a lot of attention, but it's part of the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, understanding thought, speech, action, livelihood, energy, mindfulness, concentration, So it's only 1/8 of the definition of a human being, according to Buddhist theory. But mindfulness has been sort of plucked out and used very, very effectively and
That's the
very
reductionist thing, isn't it? I've heard it described as muck mindfulness. Basically, what you do is you try and encapsulate it into something you can do in 3 minutes in the morning.
Well, that's right. And I mean, from my point of view, the Pali word for mindfulness is sati, of course, but the full expression that's often used in the text is sati sampajanyata, which means be mindful and clear comprehending. And that second part of clear comprehension is a very, very salient point from my point of view, rather than a lot of stuff that passes for mindfulness, in my understanding is simply awareness. You know, I am sitting on this seat, I can feel it through my, and etc. I'm in this place, the lights are shining in my eyes, and I'm taking it all through the senses. And there's a lot of focus on that in modern mindfulness. You can get an app, you know, and carry it around. It'll bring you back to the point. But it's deeper than that. And the mind, of course, is the focus of mindfulness. And that sometimes is a little bit overlooked. There's a lovely book by some Zen people called What's Good About Mindfulness and What's Not, I think. And they go into that. So I don't know if anyone's read that book, but it's worth a look just to put in perspective, and in perspective of the overall Eightfold Path that is, you know, as I said, the full Buddhist definition of what a human being is.
I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by the placebo effect, because the placebo effect is just bloody brilliant. And yet it is very difficult to actually use it in modern medicine because it does involve deceit. And on the whole, doctors are not supposed to deceive their patients.
Yes.
And that's a tricky old number. I did a film recently about the placebo effect, and I had to lie to a lot of people for a long period of time. We took 150 people with chronic back pain, and we said, do you want to take part in a trial? And on this trial, you're going to be given either a powerful new painkiller, Dr. Michael Mosley's new brilliant painkiller, or you're going to be given a placebo. And actually, they were all getting placebo. And these were people who were on morphine and everything. And around half of them got significant benefit because they thought they were getting the active ingredient. And then I had to tell them that I had been lying to them for the past 6 weeks. Yeah. And what was really interesting is they wanted to go on. They wanted to go on taking Dr. Michael Mosley's magic pill, despite knowing it had nothing but brown rice in it.
There's actually, just to follow up on that, there's some fascinating research being done out of Harvard on placebo that shows that the placebo effect can actually work even when people know they're on a placebo.
And doesn't that tell you something rather brilliant about the mind-body problem?
Yes.
It does.
Right. So all of this is pointing to new knowledge of the brain, new emerging neuroscience that actually shows that it's not how we thought, where the brain is thinking and then the body's separate, but rather we construct our experience and our emotions based on what we call the extended mind, or, you know, embedded cognitions. There's a lot of words for this, but what it means is that, number one, we see what we already expect and what we believe. And so we think we're perceiving reality, you know, there's this objective reality and we're perceiving it accurately, and we are phenomenally crude at perceiving reality. So much of it is shaped by what we expect. So we talked about waking up and what do you expect of the day, and it's up to us, part of what we expect to see. Number two, we construct our experience, our emotions, based on signals from the body, the brain, and the environment. What does the environment mean? That means that our social interactions are shaping our thoughts, they're shaping our emotions, they're shaping our experience. The mind is out here, and it's in interaction. So we live the mind-body connection. We just don't know that or believe it. So when we walk around believing that it is, ignoring our body and not being embodied, we're cut off from here, we're more stressed, we're more reactive. Stress causes us to dissociate from our body. So these mind-body activities, whatever it is that you feel integrates you, it's all good. There's not one that works better. Meditation is one of the many traditions of wisdom in the 8 limbs of yoga. And when you actually get in touch with your body and you are embodied, your brain is less stress reactive. You will treat people and see differently. And we had lots of examples of that, like the young man you interviewed about his fresh perspective after meditating.
It's tough, though, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to do. I mean, I am sort of twitchy, constantly on the go, drinking 18 cups of coffee before I get up in the morning, and obsessing about all sorts of things. I am an A-type masquerading as a B-type. I try to look relaxed. In fact, I'm absolutely... And so I found it really difficult. I did a film again, it was a Horizon film, and they measured my brain activity, and I did mindfulness. But they said the woman looked at my results several times, but she went, bloody hell. You are off the scale when it comes to pessimism, neuroticism, you name it. Bang!
And it's a different life. So it's what Shannon said. She's still here with all her anxieties and worries,
Yeah.
but she's living with, more conscious wisdom and discernment, and that's what it's about. We're all works in progress. We're not trying to get somewhere and then we're going to be type A and relax.
See, I had that illusion. I thought I was going there.
Yeah.
And then I realized,
Yeah.
it's never going to happen. And that's why you need support. That's why you need other people who will go, it's fine. Michael, you may be a nutter, but you're my nutter.
To follow up, I'm actually going to throw back to Amit though, because I think in this day and age, there are so many forces working against us. In some ways, especially when those circumstances are beyond our control, when the stress in our lives is not just some imaginary thing, the stress is real. In fact, at those times often, the last thing you want to be is connected. So would you care to comment about disconnection?
Yeah, I think our minds are very good at it. In fact, there's a number of studies now that show that even folks who are quite well are not here about half of the moments of our waking life. And that is not because we have iPhones or because of television or because we're not subsistence farmers. It's, I think, something very fundamental about how the mind learns to take care of itself. And this idea that the very same mental capacities that keep us alive and allow us to thrive, like predicting the future, remembering and learning from the past, language, that's why we're all still here. It's why we evolved and, so to speak, succeeded, are also the same basis for suffering. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. So I think when someone is struggling, so like, for example, how you were talking about, I don't know if it was more worry or rumination at night. I can't remember if it's the past or the future, but so like, to some degree that's good until it's not. And then I think at that moment, what's useful is knowing that that's the point where, okay, it's not. And I think those are the places where coming back to now, and there's all kinds of ways to come back to now. Mindfulness is really just one of them. But I think love is another one of them. Exercise, being in your body, being engaged with what it is that is actually either in you or in front of you now, at that point, I think is kind of that fine line between how to be, that kind of balance between connection and disconnection.
John, what was that balance for you? I imagine after the experience that you went through, there would have been a temptation to engage in all sorts of maladaptive behaviour so that you didn't have to re-experience your trauma, to try to forget it, to try to avoid it. What was the thing that, for you, gave you, I guess, the courage to turn towards it?
Yeah, when you asked me that, I thought you'd been following me into the bottle shop there. I was a bit worried, See me with that bottle of scotch. No, but yeah, my experience would lead me to think that with trauma, particularly life threat, extreme life threat, the feelings that you have, you're going to try and control them perhaps. It's understandable, using chemicals like alcohol or drugs or whatever. But in the long term, that's not really going to work for you. So unless, the reason I wrote the book is that I'm hoping people will get support, will get help along the way, and as soon as possible. Because really, the choice that I was making in writing it really came down to, will I reveal these vulnerabilities? Will I go into and expose all this stuff in print to people that I don't know? And that I think took more courage than some of the other choices that I've had to make. But it really came down to feeling that it's no different than breaking your leg, you know. So if you break your leg, you don't really sit there for 2 months thinking, it'll get better, you know, maybe it'll just be okay. You get help. You go and see a doctor, you go and see a specialist or whatever. And with the same thing with trauma, I think people should try and identify, even though they might be in a very, very bad space and not able to have the executive function to make those sorts of decisions. There should be a lot of social help and, you know, away from stigma and so forth that will help people to get to someone as quickly as possible. And that's, you know, why I wrote the book, in the hope that people will see that and, you know, be able to get some help.
Okay, so in the final 4 minutes of this hopefully enlightening panel discussion, I'm going to ask you all to give us one takeaway, your one advice on how we should be, what one thing we should be doing, one aspect we should be exploring, anything that you would say to this audience who are looking for ways to get their minds and bodies reconnected to live a happier, healthier life. I'll start with you, John.
Sure. I mean, I think what I came to conclude from the notion of balance that you're talking about is that there's a lot of studies done, as we've heard from various speakers here, on the relationship of the body, and diet came into the situation. So my feeling about it is there's a wonderful book by a guy called Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And that alerted me to how important the body is in this process, as well as the mind, and integrating those things, so that you have to try to achieve some type of balance as best you can, you know. And so this would involve a plant-based diet to some degree. This would involve exercise, whether it's Pilates or yoga or whatever, but getting back into those practices. Using meditation and mindfulness practices and so on, but in a balanced way, and also with a bit of freedom to yourself, saying, okay, I failed that week, but you know, or I've eaten this, I shouldn't have eaten that donut, or whatever it was. But you know, with some sympathy, with some loving kindness towards your own being, which I think is, from a Buddhist point of view, one of the hardest things to do, because we all know what we're like. We know this person only too well and what it's actually like inside. So to radiate loving kindness towards yourself is a very, very difficult trick, but it's one worth doing, and to be able to forgive yourself and, you know, lead a more happy and positive life.
Amit?
You know, I think it's a really, it's hard, because I think people are different, and I think it's like you were saying before, that it's hard to give a prescription if people can't stick to it. Just like in medicine, the biggest problem is people don't take their drugs, and so it's tough. I think that one way to get around that is to focus on what is relevant to everyone, regardless of what path they choose in terms of how they go about pursuing that connection or their wellness. And I think that that's about like spending time reflecting to figure out what is actually important to you, your values, what's meaningful to you, your purpose, and doing like what that some folks call values clarification for yourself, and revisiting that, and then looking at things you're doing in your life or not doing, and say, okay, so what is a small thing today or a small thing tomorrow that's consistent with my values or with my purpose or what's meaningful to me? And if that ends up being in your body, or if it ends up connecting with somebody, or it means engaging with your work in a different way, a different kind of perspective, I think that is can only be beneficial.
And Elissa?
Building on that, I'm going to give homework to you all, which is to wake up tomorrow and to first remember, well, happiness, what makes me happy, and to then ask yourself either, what can I do to help someone else today, purpose in life, or what can I do to show gratitude. Or it could just be, what am I grateful for? Any one of those things is going to put you in the mindset and the trajectory of a more positive, loving day. Secondly, when you have to face something stressful, there's unpredictable things, period, obviously, but if there's something you know of, your second piece of homework is to get some perspective from it and try to reframe it with a positive stress mindset. I'm talking about that at 4 at the Work Wellness, and I actually have a free chapter on my website about how to have the positive stress mindset. So it's amecenter.ucsf.edu. Aging, Metabolism, Emotions is what it stands for. And so you can download that chapter on stress if you're interested. Thanks.
I'm a huge fan of challenge. That which does not kill you makes you stronger. So intermittent fasting is challenging. That's why you do it. Exercise is challenging. It tears muscle. That's why you do it. And if you can build more challenge into your life, preferably not the form that kills you, then that is a good thing. So, for example, take up dancing in middle age. I did it. I'm terrible, but it's fantastic. Try and learn a new language. Lots of data showing people who learn a new language in middle age, it helps with dementia. Do something different. And one of the things I have yet to do, but I know I should do, there's a lot of evidence, for example, if you think about somebody who's really changed your life, you write them a letter, and then you go and find them, and you read them that letter. And I have a philosophy tutor who absolutely profoundly changed my life at Oxford. And I have written him the letter, but I haven't had the nerve yet to go and read him the letter.
Wow.
But I will attempt to do that. That I find, this sort of thing, I find incredibly challenging because I am not given to bursts of emotion very much. And it could end in tears, probably mine. But that's probably a good thing. So do challenge yourself.
I'm also a big fan of challenge, and I set myself a challenge to tick every single box on the recommended healthy living to-do list in a day. All the things that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be exercising, meditating, eating a healthy plant-based diet, etc., etc., etc. That was my challenge. And guess what? I failed. And so I think if I could end on this one positive note, it is not about doing it all, but rather about what you do overall that counts.
Absolutely.
Thank
Hooray!
you.